Dustin Honken was born the 22nd of March, 1968 and currently sits on death row. He is being housed at the United States Penitentiary Terre Haute, a high-security U.S. penitentiary, located in Indiana. He is scheduled to be executed on the 17th of July, 2020. Honken was convicted and sentenced to death for the killing of 2 children in a drug-related conspiracy in which 3 others were also killed. It began in 1992. Honken and his best friend, Timothy Cutcomb, began manufacturing methamphetamine in Arizona. Honken distributed his methamphetamine to only 2 dealers, Greg Nicholson and Terry DeJuice. Nicholson and DeJuice were located in Mason City, Iowa. Honken became acquainted with DeJuice's then-girlfriend, Angela Johnson, in 1993. The two promptly began a romantic relationship. Johnson became pregnant with Honken's child later that year. In March 1993, law enforcement began investigating Nicholson. After officers searched Nicholson's house, Nicholson decided to cooperate in the investigation. On the 21st of March, 1993, officers arranged a recorded meeting between Nicholson and Honken at Nicholson's home in Iowa, during which the two discussed methamphetamine and Nicholson paid Honken $3,000 for past deliveries. That same day, officers arrested Honken and Cutcomb. Honken moved from Arizona to Mason City after his arrest. Honken was initially charged with state drug offenses. After Nicholson testified before a federal grand jury in April 1993, the grand jury indicted Honken for conspiracy to manufacture methamphetamine. The state charges were then dismissed in favor of federal charges. Honken notified the court he intended to plead guilty, and a plea hearing was scheduled for the 30th of July, 1993. Honken was released on bond. During June and July 1993, Honken and Johnson searched for Nicholson, often asking Johnson's friend, Christy Gorbatz, to babysit Johnson's daughter while they searched. On the 7th of July, 1993, Johnson purchased a 9mm handgun. Meanwhile, in mid-July 1993, a mutual friend introduced Nicholson to Lori Duncan. Duncan was a single working mother raising her 2 girls, Candy, age 10, and Amber, age 6. Nicholson began staying at Duncan's house. On the night of the 24th of July, 1993, Honken and Johnson again asked Gorbatz to babysit Johnson's daughter and borrowed Gorbatz's car, so they could search for Nicholson. Honken and Johnson normally returned about midnight, but on this occasion they did not come home until around 5 o'clock in the morning. On the 25th of July, 1993, Nicholson, Duncan, Candy, and Amber suddenly disappeared and were declared missing persons. 5 days later, on the 30th of July, 1993, Honken appeared for his plea hearing, but declined to plead guilty. Honken told his attorney he heard a rumor Nicholson had skipped town. Honken also provided his attorney with a VHS tape of Nicholson saying Honken was not guilty of the charges against him. Around the 2nd of August, 1993, the government learned Nicholson was missing after warrants were issued for Nicholson's arrest and officers were unsuccessful in locating Nicholson. The government continued its drug investigation against Honken, now turning its attention to Honken's only other dealer, DeJuice. Honken told Cutcomb he was worried about DeJuice testifying against him. Honken believed DeJuice had been subpoenaed to appear before the grand jury. DeJuice then too disappeared on November 5, 1993. The night of his disappearance, DeJuice dropped his 10-year-old daughter off at his mother's house and told his mother he was going to meet Johnson, his former girlfriend. DeJuice said he would return shortly to pick up his daughter that evening, but DeJuice never returned. In the winter of 1993 to 1994, while cleaning a bedroom closet, Gorbatz discovered a large black handgun with attached silencer in a cosmetics bag belonging to Johnson. Gorbatz called Johnson to demand Johnson remove the gun. Johnson told Gorbatz not to worry about the gun because Honken would take care of it. Shortly after, Honken went to Cutcomb for assistance destroying a large black pistol. Honken and Cutcomb used a torch to cut and melt the gun into a number of unrecognizable pieces, which they discarded in ditches along a country road. As time went on, and with federal prosecutors losing contact with the only two witnesses they had no other choice than to drop the charges. The police didn't forget about Honken, and Honken didn't forget about the quick cash from manufacturing. Even before these charges were dropped, Honken had already built a complex methamphetamine laboratories and took significant steps toward manufacturing methamphetamine. In the fall of 1995, Honken recruited Dan Cobain to help him manufacture methamphetamine. Unbeknownst to Honken, Cobain went to police and began cooperating. With Cobain's assistance, police began an undercover investigation, and on the 7th of February, 1996, officers executed a search warrant at Honken's house. Officers seized a methamphetamine laboratories, chemicals, and equipment, as well as paper notes and books on manufacturing drugs and how to bind and gag prisoners. Honken was charged with conspiracy to manufacture methamphetamine from 1992 through the 7th of February, 1996. While the 1996 charges were pending, Honken plotted to murder Cobain, as well as certain police officers and chemists, and to destroy evidence against him. At this point, Cutcomb decided to cooperate with police. Cutcomb wore a wire and recorded numerous hours of conversations, in which Honken referenced eliminating witnesses in 1993, and described his plan to evade the current charges by killing witnesses and officers. Based upon these tapes, the court revoked Honken's pre-trial release and detained him in the Woodbury County Jail in Sioux City, Iowa. While incarcerated, Honken admitted to other inmates he killed witnesses to avoid earlier charges. Honken went into great detail about the murders. Honken also began planning the murders of Cobain and Cutcomb, instructing a fellow inmate to kill Cutcomb and providing directions to Cutcomb's house. Together with another inmate, Honken attempted to escape by breaking a hole in the wall of a cell and arranging for Johnson to deliver a hacksaw and rope. Jailers discovered the hole and foiled the escape plot. On the 2nd of June, 1997, Honken pled guilty to the drug charges and was ultimately sentenced to 324 months in prison. That's 27 years the prosecution would have to gather any further evidence in the disappearance of Greg Nicholson and Terry DeJuice. In 2000, Gorbatz finally decided to cooperate in the ongoing murder investigation, telling officers about Honken's and Johnson's search for Nicholson, and about Gorbatz's later discovery of the gun in her closet. A federal grand jury indicted Johnson in July 2000, charging her with the murders of Nicholson, the Duncan family, and DeJuice. At trial, Honken stipulated, while in the Benton County Jail, Johnson became acquainted with Robert McNeese, a federal prisoner serving a life sentence for an unrelated offense. Johnson and McNeese discussed Johnson's case. As a ruse, McNeese told Johnson she could escape responsibility for the murders if McNeese could arrange to have another inmate who was already serving a life sentence falsely claim responsibility for murdering the 5 victims. McNeese told Johnson that in order to make the confession believable, the other inmate would need to be able to furnish proof of his involvement by leading authorities to the victims' bodies. Johnson prepared and provided McNeese with maps and notes describing the locations where the 5 bodies were buried. McNeese turned the maps and notes over to law enforcement. Using the maps Johnson drew, officers discovered the bodies of Nicholson and the Duncan family, buried in a single hole located in a wooded area outside Mason City. Candy and Amber each had a single bullet hole in the back of their heads. Nicholson and Duncan were bound, gagged, and shot multiple times, including once in the head. DeJuice's body was found in a field a few miles away, face down in a shallow hole. DeJuice had been shot 1 or more times, and his skull was severely fragmented, requiring significant reconstruction. Honken was sent to the United States Penitentiary at Florence, Colorado, where he became convinced he would be charged with the murders. If tried for the murders, Honken planned to call his associates as witnesses in Sioux City, and then overpower and kill the guards and escape. After escaping, Honken intended to murder witnesses, law enforcement officers, and a federal prosecutor. To prepare for their escape, Honken and his associates practiced retrieving an officer's weapon, learning how to remove handcuffs with minimal tools, and training in martial arts scenarios centering around encounters with an armed escort. Honken was indeed charged with the murders on the 30th of August, 2001, and his trial began in August 2004. Concluding, Honken posed a serious security risk due to his prior escape attempts and threats against witnesses and officials connected with his trial. The district court ordered Honken to wear a stun belt and be shackled and bolted to the floor during his trial. To minimize potential prejudice to Honken, the district court ordered that Honken not be moved in the presence of the jury, that table skirts be placed on counsel tables so jurors would not see the shackles, that the shackles be fitted with sufficient chain to allow Honken to move naturally, and that the shackles make no noticeable noise. The government presented 54 witnesses, over 300 exhibits, and 13 days of trial testimony. The details were becoming clear as to how Honken gained access to the VHS tape, and how the victims were kidnapped and murdered. On that day of the 24th of July, 1993, when Honken and Johnson had borrowed Gorbat's car, the pair had managed to locate Nicholson at Laurie Duncan's residence. It is said Honken used Johnson as a diversion to gain access to the home. Angela Johnson knocked on the door to Duncan's home, and once the door was opened, Honken forced entry into the home. Using the gun, Honken then forced Nicholson into the bedroom while Johnson bound and gagged Duncan as well as her two daughters to chairs in the living room. While in the bedroom, Honken forced the confession out of Nicholson on video, stating Honken had nothing to do with drugs and his statement to police was false. After receiving the forced confession, Honken tied Nicholson up and brought him into the front room with Johnson and the Duncan family. Once everybody was in the front room, Honken began strangling Nicholson in front of the family. This set off hysteria and panic amongst the Duncan family, where their cries and pleads became too loud for Honken's liking. During this time, it was said Johnson repeatedly hit Laurie over the head, until she became unconscious. Once Honken had strangled Nicholson motionless, his attention was focused on Laurie Duncan. She too was strangled limp. The noise that Candy and Amber made enraged Honken. They too were strangled. Thinking Honken had killed all four, Johnson and Honken placed them into the trunk of their vehicle to the spot they were eventually found. Once at this location, the bodies were removed from the trunk. Honken shot all four with the 9mm handgun, making sure to place at least one bullet in each of their heads. Terry DeJuice's disappearance was figured out to be a setup from Johnson, acting as if she were in fear of Honken and wanted to meet. Once Johnson and DeGoose were both at the meeting spot, they chatted until Honken had emerged with a baseball bat. He beat DeJuice to near death, then just as the others shot him and placed him into a shallow grave. Once that was completed, Honken drove DeJuice's vehicle to an apartment complex where it was later discovered. On the 14th of October, 2004, the jury found Honken guilty of all 17 counts. 5 counts of witness tampering, 1 count of soliciting the murder of a witness, 1 count of conspiracy to tamper with witnesses and to solicit the murder of witnesses, 5 counts of conspiracy to commit murder while engaging in the manufacture and distribution of methamphetamine, drug conspiracy murder, and 5 counts of continuing criminal enterprise murder. The jury voted to impose the death penalty for the children and life imprisonment for the murder of the adults. Johnson too would have her day in court, where she would also receive the death penalty. In 2012, her death penalty was overturned to a life sentence without possibility of parole. So many things wrong with the events that led up to and followed these murders. It's hard to believe that it took so long to get justice for the victims and their families. It's also a scary thought to think, what if Honken and Johnson would have never spoke of the murders again, and just left the drug game, living their life as normal members of society? Would they have gotten away with murder? Would they now be living free in America? So with all that being said, What do you think of Dustin Lee Honken? Should he have been given life instead of the death penalty?